There was once a man whose fingers danced with the elegance of a court violinist, yet they never played music. They pierced skin, drew thread through lips that would never speak again, some with faces crushed by plague, others with cheeks still warm. The village of Darnhelm, buried deep in the northern reaches of the Old Kingdom, depended on him not just for tailoring robes of mourning, but for what they believed to be a final, sacred silence. His name was Arlo. By the time he turned, Arlo had already sown, shut over 1,000 mouths, men, women, infants. The people of Darnhelm believed that the dead could speak, not to the living directly but to spirits, to something older, darker, older than God. But all had heard of him. She was 5, the daughter of his estranged brother, who had vanished 10 winters ago during the Great Famine. No one had known he returned. Pale, quiet, already a creature of shadows, she died in her sleep. No wounds, no fever, just silence. Her father, a blacksmith, found her cold in her cradle and did not weep. Instead, he locked the door and walked to Arlo's house before sunrise. He would kneel beside the body, eyes down, gloved hands trembling with reverence or fear no one could tell, and from his old leather bag he would withdraw his black thread, blessed with ash from burnt psalms. Arlo followed him back. The cottage was dark, smelled of burnt herbs and iron. The girl was laid on a linen cloth, just enough, and a curved bone needle passed down through his bloodline. He was older than time. The needle entered flesh, but the thread refused to follow. Then he heard it, not aloud, not in his ears, but in the marrow of his bones, and fed on grief like wine. And so, when someone died, it wasn't the priest who came first. It was a... If a corpse's mouth was left open, even slightly, it became a door, a whispering crack in the fabric between worlds. And from that crack, they said, came the voice of the Hollow One. And Arlo, staring at the sealed mouth of a girl who had whispered after death, realized something terrible. No one had seen the Hollow One, not really, but they twitched, as though remembering language. He arrived in silence, never asking questions. He didn't always live this way. Once, long ago, Arlo had dreams of fashioning cloaks for lords, landing in silence so loud it cracked something inside him. He did not speak. He did not scream. He just stood and wept, and with the strength of a blacksmith and the hatred of a man robbed twice by fate, forced it through her mouth. Stitch by stitch, he closed it shut. He had fallen in love once. A girl named Aaliyah, with copper eyes and laughter like summer wind. But when her mother died, Arlo was asked no required to seal her lips shut. Aaliyah never looked at him the same after that. Perhaps she saw his stitching when she smiled. Perhaps she imagined the feel of thread across her own teeth. Arlo never married. The village admired him, feared him. Children whispered that he could hear the dead talk as he worked, that his thread hummed with voices begging for release. But none dared ask if it was true. Until the year 1712, the year the river boiled with frogs, and the sky burned red for 7 nights. That was the year the child died. Her name was Melon. The moment Arlo saw the man, his hands began to shake, not from fear, from something deeper recognition perhaps, because Melon had been his niece. Yet there was no hesitation. Pulled on his gloves, opened his bag, but when he inserted the needle, something strange happened. The thread pulled back, like a worm resisting soil. He tried again, fingers trembling more now. A whisper, 3 words, "Don't bind me." Arlo froze. He looked at the girl. Her eyes were still shut, but her lips got above moved. It wasn't speech. Arlo staggered backward, needle falling to the ground. But her father did not. He stormed forward, seized the thread. The lips bled. The girl did not wake, but the room changed. The fire dimmed. The corners of the cottage bent inward. She had not been dead, not truly, and whatever he had just helped bind was no longer Melon. For 3 days Arlo did not, so his hands, once precise, unwavering instruments of silent ritual, now shook with a subtle, constant tremor, as though something inside them had unraveled. He sat alone in his small stone dwelling on the edge of Darnhelm, curtains drawn, candles unlit. The needle lay untouched on the table, coiled thread beside it like a serpent in sleep. Mouths he had sewn years ago. They returned to him in fragments, not from decay, but from struggle, as if she had tried to speak through the thread. Her eyes stared into his, not with malice, but with grief. Betrayal. A noble woman with blackened gums. A boy with a cleft palate. A soldier with his tongue bitten clean off. All of them, mouthing words he could not hear, except one. But he did not rest. Each night, as wind scraped the shutters like claws, he dreamed of lips, not just Melon's but hundreds. Melon, every time he saw her in the dream, her lips were torn. And then always came the same moment, a voice not, hers whispering from the dark behind her. She was the last lock. Arlo woke, gasping, fingers aching, thread embedded beneath his nails. He was old, narrow-shouldered, with eyes like smoke and sermons that bled guilt into the bones. He entered Arlo's house without knocking. He had not touched it in waking life, as if the wind had sunk too deep into the stones. Then it grew, word by word, into the shape of a name, Arlo. But the earth rejected her. On the fourth day, the priest came. Each time, the soil turned soft, as though something beneath stirred. The men said they heard crying, but no one weeps beneath 6 feet of clay. Father Anselm was not a kind man. You will attend the funeral, he said, not as command, but as prophecy. The village was asleep, wet slithering, like something turning itself inside out. Only he and the voice remained. Arlo did not answer. Father Anselm stepped closer, lips pursed as if holding back wrath. She was buried yesterday, he murmured. Not Milan's flame snuffed in snow. He remembered the moment, the panic, the shame when the needle fell from his hand, and Melon's father seized it. The thread he used had not been prepared. It had not been sanctified. It was raw. It was open, not the hollow ones. Something between. Arlo looked up, and above all, only the willing dead may be bound. Arlo had always known this, but that morning Melon had whispered, so faint it came not through the ears, but from behind them. A voice that matched none he knew had pleaded. The grave collapsed twice. The priest continued. Arlo whispered, hoarsely, "What do you want from me?" The priest paused. His voice dropped. "I want to know what you did." There it was. The unspoken fear that Arlo had broken the rite. There were rules, old and unwritten, but sacred nonetheless. The thread must be blackened by fire. The final stitch must pass through the filth. She had not been willing. The priest left with no answers, and that night the whispering began. Not in dreams. From the well. It started as a murmur. He tried to ignore it, but every time he passed by the well in his way to the baker, to the chapel, to the forest's edge, it called, "Arlo, why did you so?" And then, worse, "Come closer." One night, as snow thickened across the thatch roofs of Darnhelm and the moon turned red behind clouds, Arlo stood before the well, lantern in hand. He leaned over. There was no water, only depth, and from that depth, a sound, not words this time, but a rhythm. Then came the voice again. "Was not yours." The realization struck like thunder. Arlo stumbled backward, the lantern falling, and whatever had been watching through Milan's eyes had followed it into the flesh, into him, because that night Arlo heard something else, from inside his own house, from inside his own throat. "Stitch yourself, Arlo. Close the gate." And for a moment, just a moment, he almost obeyed. From that night on, Arlo no longer trusted silence. It pulsed, shifted. It was no longer the absence of sound, but the weight of something holding its breath. Waiting, the walls of his cottage, once sanctuary, recited the death rite. He stared into a cracked mirror as he lifted trembling hands to his face. The thread slid through the needles. Alike it knew the path by heart, but as soon as the metal touched his skin, he saw her, now swelled and cracked like the inside of a coffin clawed too long. The floorboards whispered. The bedside, when he sat down, not with softness, but with memory, as if it remembered the bodies laid across it before. The voice returned, not from the well this time, nor from beyond. It came from inside. The cottage's eyes, a stitching hum in the back of his jaw, vibrating between his molars. He would wake to find black thread coiled around his fingers, tied in perfect knots he had no memory of tying. His lips bled, his teeth ached, and still the voice begged, "Stitch yourself, Arlo. Close the gate." He tried. Gods forgive him. He tried. He boiled the needle. Melon, hanging open like a marionette whose strings had been cut. His tongue was swollen, bruised, as if someone or something had tried to pull it out from within, again and again. But the thread burned and the stitches screamed. The butcher saw his cleaver moving on its own, slicing lips from dead pigs long after slaughter. The well dried to dust. Babies were born silent, and 2 elderly men were found dead with tongues bitten clean off. Even Father Anselm, proud and cruel, was found muttering in his sleep. The mouth speaks the soul. If it opens, he walks. The thread was wrapped around his neck in a tight crisscross, a mockery of the final stitch he had failed to make. Standing just behind him in the mirror, though no reflection of her could be seen, sewing endless rows of mouths into a single bolt of cloth. They were not real mouths, yet each stitch was perfect. Each pair of lips bore a name, some still living. Her mouth was open, no longer sewn. Then came the sound not of footsteps, but of breath, drawn in reverse. And what poured from it was not sound, it was light, but not the kind that warms or guides. It was pale, an inverted flame writhing like smoke under water. It filled the mirror, and the hands of those who sealed them, and it whispered, "The gate is not in your mouth, Arlo." He collapsed. When he awoke, his jaw was dislocated, his spine bent as if a great hand had gripped it like a marionette's rod. He knew then. It was no longer just him. The villagers began to notice. Not at first. They saw him walking slower, limping where no wound had been. They whispered of his eyes, how the whites had turned a faint shade of grey, like the first frost on stone. Children no longer approached his cart. Dogs barked at his window, and one morning, a cat was found stranglet in black thread on his doorstep. Not his own, theirs. The baker's wife dreamed of sewing her daughter's mouth shut. Darnhelm began to rot from within. Birdsong vanished, and all the while Arlo remained sitting by his window, needle in hand, and some long buried. One evening, as dusk bled like wine across the hills, the Hollow One returned. No one saw it enter, but Arlo knew. He felt the air change thickeners. If soaked in honey and bile. The candle flames bowed inward. The mirror cracked clean down its center, and the voice older than dust spoke from behind him. "You were never the gatekeeper, Arlo. You were the thread." The pain came instantly. Every stitch he had ever made, the hundreds, the thousands, burned themselves into his skin. His veins itched, his tendons pulled, and then he saw it, not with eyes, but with something deeper. The thread between worlds. It stretched out before him not as metaphor, but as a thing, endless, pulsing, woven from the mouths of the dead, and in the center, pulsing like a heart stitched from grief, was his own mouth, open, waiting. He tried to scream, but there was no sound, only thread. They found him on the 7th morning of frost, curled in the center of his cottage, surrounded by a sea of black thread, not a tangle but a tapestry. It covered the floor, climbed the walls, hung from the rafters, like a cathedral veil. Each thread held weight, each knot bled meaning, and at the center, nailed into the beams above his head, was the cloth of mouths. Hundreds? No. Thousands. All sewn shut. Some were stitched with reverence, delicate and tight like prayers. Others, with fury haphazard, jagged, as if sealing away screams that could never be cleansed. And some were sewn from within, the thread emerging as if the mouth itself had learned to silence its own soul. And Arlo, he was not dead, with such precision that even the midwife who delivered him failed to find the seam. His tongue had been unraveled into black silk, braided around his throat in a final loop. Not truly. His body still breathed, barely, though no air passed his lips. They were gone, cleanly, surgically. Where his mouth had been, now lay only skin stitched shut from beneath. No one claimed the body, sinking into the earth, seeping into wells, into roots, into marrow. No rites were spoken, no bell tolled. The villagers boarded the cottage from the outside and burned it at dusk, but the smoke never rose. It curled downward, like ink in water. They say the thread still moves beneath the soil, that if you press your ear to the ground near the ruins, you'll hear not worms or rainwater but breathing, and sometimes murmurs of names, of those long dead, of those not yet born. And as the body was laid beneath the soil, the eldest living relative would stand over the grave and whisper, only once. In the years that followed, Darnhelm changed. No children sang, and the townsfolk followed. One by one, they sewed white linen masks over their mouths, some symbolic, others real. The church no longer used it. Books with dialogue were burned into the silence that grew heavier with each generation. The new priest took a vow of silence, his thread dragging behind him like a shadow made of longing, not hunting, not haunting. Those who dared speak aloud were not punished. They simply vanished, their homes emptied overnight, their beds untouched. Their mirrors cracked with the same delicate line that split Arlos on the final night. And in time, a new tradition was born. At each funeral, the family would bring not flowers, nor food but thread. A single spool died in ash. Let the mouth sleep. All footage, characters, and events are part of a creative narrative, and should not be interpreted as real. Then, without speaking again, they would sew the lips shut. This was not superstition. It was memory. Not of what was, but of what remains. For the story did not die with Arlo. It stitched itself into the fabric of the village, into the bloodline. Some say Arlo still walks, faceless and mute, in the forest near Dunhelm, but listening for the sound of an open mouth. And if he hears you speak, he does not kill you, no. He simply reaches forward, ever so gently, and sews you into the story. This video is a fictional documentary, for entertainment purposes only.